I feel like a big part of why a lot of fans criticize the Battlefield beta as feeling like Call of Duty comes down to one major thing: the maps. And while I've already made a video discussing how Battlefield 6 is certainly not a clone of Call of Duty, with its bigger scale, deeper sandbox, and more complex balance, at the end of the day, I did mention that, in my opinion, Battlefield 6 shares a lot of aesthetics with Modern Warfare 2019, something I feel like is highlighted beautifully with this little moment from the trailer. 6 years ago, Modern Warfare set out on the same mission as Battlefield is today, to create a more grounded, relatable, and artistically realistic take on their franchise. And while I certainly stand by my position that these games couldn't be farther apart in terms of gameplay, Battlefield has fundamentally changed its formula when it comes to map design, especially in light of 2042. And once you notice the changes to Battlefield's philosophy, it becomes impossible to ignore. But let's back up. First off, Call of Duty doesn't own modern military environments. While COD certainly has a history of tight 3-lane map design for its smaller modes, at the end of the day, while the franchise has a history of realistic Middle Eastern militarized settings, they don't own the entire concept. If anything, Call of Duty has been reflective of the modern military movies like Zero Dark 30, Green Zone, and Black Hawk Down. COD is ultimately just one expression of the larger modern military genre, sort of like how Battlefield 3 was also more closely tied to that theme, while later titles got more and more fictional. What Battlefield 6 is doing that makes people feel like it's entering Call of Duty's territory is that it's responding to the same criticism in the same way Modern Warfare did several years ago, and thus aligning itself more closely with this general style of modern conflict. Maps like Cairo and Iberian Offensive are both pretty stereotypical environments when compared to the larger genre, but rather different when compared to the maps of something like 2042. But how these maps are different is really interesting. First off, Battlefield 6's maps are just more physically and artistically dense. Maps like Cairo, Iberian Offensive, and Empire State are incredibly porous, especially when compared to 2042's urban maps like Haven or Kaleidoscope, while Battlefield 6 also offers more detail in both its lane structure as well as its graphics, textures, and artwork. And as we all jump back into 2042 for these last few weeks, I find it really jarring to go from a map like Cairo, with its incredibly narrow alleyways, endless interiors, and dim corners, back to what 2042 considers an urban map with Haven, where half the map is open sand dunes, and the rest is just empty, copy and pasted buildings. While on a map like Cairo, the environment's so dense that you're often totally enveloped in the shadows of buildings, or fighting within what feels like interior spaces. The map is simply more tightly defined with clear infantry and vehicle spaces, and a lot more options for player movement. And while 2042 is perhaps the most extreme example, even many of the older games really gave a lot of breathing room to their environments, thus leaving large open areas where players had a lot less opportunity to change their positioning. Even maps like Siege of Shanghai featured a ton of negative space, where the game forces players to stand and fight toe-to-toe. And while there was a lot better visibility, there were often a lot less options when it came to player navigation, which brings me on to my next point. Older Battlefields, but 2042 specifically with its original focus on Hazard Zone, were totally built around the idea of POIs, or points of interest, and you can definitely feel it. Just look at a map like the original Hourglass. It literally had nothing for hundreds of meters in between objectives. 2042 has no consistency in its layouts, lanes, nor player choice. Stuck at the highway on Hourglass? Well, you better just start running, cause there's no other option for the next several hundred meters until the next objective. And I think that's what really killed the gameplay of 2042. Players didn't have enough to play around, no environment to work with, or get creative inside of. However, Battlefield 6 is at the totally opposite end of the scale. Map knowledge, holding angles, and knowing exactly how to poke in and out of an area is all going to be crucial to winning on these much denser maps. And the big thing I appreciate about this new take on map design is that it activates a much larger percentage of the map. With maybe the exception of Liberation Peak, I feel like I've had a lot more interesting engagement across Battlefield 6, instead of these same locations and the same race to the same corners like we saw on 2042. Battlefield 6 felt a lot more varied with its engagements and my personal agency whether to back out or jump in, which was something that was practically non-existent in 2042. In that game, especially on maps like Orbital, Hourglass, or Breakaway, if you were caught in between objectives, you were most likely out of luck. The icy oceans of Breakaway, the runway of Orbital, and the sand dunes of Hourglass honestly just operated as a no man's land between more interesting locations, very much like a battle royale, and something Battlefield 6 is looking to, perhaps, overcorrect. But one thing I must say that Battlefield 2042 did exceedingly well on was giving maps real personality, something that I think is sorely missing in Battlefield 6. Now, as my final point, it's kinda become one of my few gripes since playing the beta, and one area I think the Call of Duty fans are absolutely correct. Battlefield 6 maps aren't built around a central theme like traditional Battlefield maps, and that's a massive shame. No orbital rocket, no Shanghai Tower, no Ballroom Blitz Castle. Everything so far in Battlefield 6 feels sorta generic. And while the idea of Empire State is interesting, it's honestly just a glorified skybox. While in prior games, players got to really indulge in these locations in ways no other game ever did. Battlefield 6 has made a very clear choice to pursue realism over everything else, and while I think it benefits the game in many ways, like offering a larger variety of engagements, it's ultimately at the cost of some of that Battlefield identity. I feel like a lot of these maps are going to blend together over time, and Battlefield 6 will never have its own Siege of Shanghai, Wake Island, or Damavand's Peak. Instead, I think we'll have a lot of solid, but perhaps forgettable maps, losing a bit of that Battlefield magic while in the pursuit of better gameplay and a more realistic setting. A trade-off I think a lot of fans will struggle with. But guys, tell me what you think and drop those comments below, and for everything else Battlefield, stay tuned and subscribe, and as always, thank you guys for watching.